And let's talk about the mechanisms. Obviously, it's a movement for a People's Party now. Obviously, I would think the goal is to be the People's Party. You've said you guys plan on running candidates for the midterms in 2022, as well as even the presidential campaign in 2024. My question is not whether it's a good idea. I think it's a great idea. I'm with everything that was advocated for in your conference or convention. My question is, when you look at what governors like Andrew Cuomo are already doing to try and disenfranchise and eliminate third parties, in New York, for example, he's trying to get rid of the Green Party off ballots. He's trying to get rid of Working Families Party off ballots. This kind of thing has happened all over the country in lesser degrees, but essentially trying to make it more difficult to get on ballots for third parties. We saw what happened with Howie Hawkins in the presidential, where he was not able to get on the ballot in several key swing states. What is your mechanism for actually assuring ballot access? Because if they're going to rig it against progressives within the Democratic Party, why wouldn't they rig it against People's Party candidates?
They will, and they already have. They've already rigged the system. You know, this is why they dismantled fusion voting in most of the countries when independent parties became a threat to them. And it's, New York is one of the few states in the country that managed to keep it. And so, yes, they will and they have. But you now have, as progressives, I think we're really good at saying we want to do what we're going to let the people guide us on policy, and so we have all these supermajority positions, whether it's Medicare for all, getting money out of politics, free public college, breaking up the banks. All of those have like 60% or more support of the American people. And yet the American people are also telling us how they want it to be done. And they're also telling us what they think of these two parties. They're saying, when you ask them consistently, and this isn't like just this year or even last year, this is really like for a decade now, that the majority of Americans have been saying, a growing majority that's now at about 60%, that we need a major new party. It's highest among Latinos, African Americans. It's highest among young people and people who are poorest. And so, what do they all have in common? They're the most left behind and disadvantaged by the system, of course. And so with the Democratic Party, you just don't have the ability to inspire the kind of resistance, the authentic kind of resistance, because you're always held back by what that brand is. You need a brand that has more authenticity, more credibility to actually stand on the issues that the majority of Americans want. As for things like the structural impediments and things like that, the Green Party and the Libertarian Party, even as under-resourced as, for example, the Green Party is, they have a budget of about $250,000 a year. The Libertarian Party, a few $1,000,000. And so that's not enormous. And yet the Libertarian Party in 2016 and 2020 has managed to get on the ballots in all 50 states. The Green Party got on the ballot in 46 states in 2016. And so even those parties have proven that even with a relatively meager amount of resources, you can overcome those hurdles. And that's exactly what we're looking at. And that's despite the institutional pressures. And so some of the way, and you also mentioned, for example, the way that the two parties went after Howie Hawkins and the Green Party, trying to knock him off the ballot. That was because they were running for presidential. They were getting essentially presidential ballot access in those states where they were challenging it. They didn't have a party line. And so what we're doing instead is we're getting a party line, because then you're insulated from that. Then your candidate is essentially running on that party line, and they can't challenge your kind of last minute effort to get presidential ballot access. Yeah, it means essentially you have a ballot line that you have. And so the process for getting ballot access is in most states, they have somewhat different processes, but in the large majority of them, you have to collect a certain amount of signatures in order to get a ballot line, so that you appear, when you go vote, you'll see Democratic Party, Republican Party, People's Party. And so that takes thousands to tens of thousands of signatures in each state. And so that's essentially what it means, is that you'll have that ballot line rather than going through the process of kind of applying to be on the ballot as an independent, and so there's a difference there, because when you're running as an independent, then they can challenge your ballot access at the last minute, and they can try to get you off the ballot, as they did successfully with Howie Hawkins. But if you have a ballot line, if you have a party line, and your party appears on the ballot already, then they can't do that, because you're just running as a candidate within that party, just like the candidates within the Democratic and the Republican parties, and that gives you protection.
And let me ask you, obviously it's not easy, I'm finding out. We break, I think, pretty important stories all the time, and the corporate media won't touch it. But what would be your media strategy for 2022 and beyond? Because I don't think the national media is going to be covering People's Party candidate A, B, or C. Obviously, independent media might be a help, but how do you break through so that, for example, let's look at Nina Turner right now. She's running as a Democrat in a pretty, traditional Democratic district. How do you even get People's Party candidates, local news coverage, whatever, to kind of break that mentality, particularly among older voters that might not even know there's a third party option, but if they found out about it, might just think they're fringe?
Right. Well, consistently, what people at Justice Democrats, Brand New Congress, have said, other organizers have said, is most successful in getting candidates elected is how well, how strong your kind of ground game is. And so, you can overcome even not getting the kind of corporate coverage that a candidate would get in that way. There's also local coverage is actually more important than national coverage, particularly when you're running for, say, a certain congressional district or a local office. And that's a good thing, because it's easier to get local coverage than it is to get national coverage from the big, corporate outlets. The other thing is that we look at this at what Bernie Sanders did. In 2016, when he ran, he's really kind of proof of concept for what we're doing overall, because he started at 3% name recognition on that campaign. He obviously had no money. He didn't even think he was going to be as successful as he was, or what he was tapping into. And yet he managed to go from that to universal name recognition, 46% of the vote, millions of voters. And he would have even won the Democratic primary in both primaries, I believe, if the party hadn't come in and put its thumb on the scale, basically rigged the process in 2016, in Iowa in 2020, and all of that. And so that goes to show that those institutional factors can be overcome. And Trump also goes to show that even when the media, the establishment media, spends all of its time attacking you, that the establishment media is so discredited that, in fact, that lends a kind of credibility to what you're doing, and it gives people a kind of interest in what you're doing. And so we think that we can overcome it in those ways. And then, of course, with digital organizing, from everything from Force the Vote to the Bernie Sanders campaign, which was very much kind of a product of digital organizing online, on social media, through apps. All of this was what enabled the campaign to compete with, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden, or whether it's to things like the recent what's happened with the stock at GameStop. All of this has been digitally cultivated, and it's represented this kind of like working class fight back and resistance, and that's exactly the kind of thing that we're tapping into, because the online community, as much as Silicon Valley and as much as the establishment parties are trying to repress that, it still represents a way of communicating peer-to-peer with thousands of people and bypassing the traditional gatekeepers of information.
And where are you at right now? Obviously, we're in early 2021. This year is, there's a few high-profile governor's races, but really everything starts next year with the midterms. Are you guys researching candidates, interviewing potential candidates? Where does things stand now in your hopes for 2022?
We're looking into candidates. We are hoping to run about 15 congressional candidates across the country. We want to, as a part of our broader strategy, we believe that in 2022 to overcome some of the hurdles that you mentioned, for example. We want to elect a contingent into Congress. We want to elect members of Congress. And what that would do is it would kind of shatter the illusion of invincibility that the two parties have. If we were able to do that, it would also give us the bully pulpit on a national level. And it might even introduce enough members of Congress into the House, for example, that neither party would have a majority. And that would be very interesting, because then they would either be forced to work with us or they would have to work with each other, as we know they would, I think, to pass their agenda. And that provides a platform for 2024 where we want to run for president, where we're planning a presidential campaign. And so right now we have registered in Maine and also in Colorado. So we've officially registered in 2 states. There's a lot of other states that are in progress right now. And we're in the process of collecting signatures in both those states and registrations, as well as the other states. And so that's what we're looking to do in 2022. And we think that we can elect members of Congress, and that they can really, they're not going to care about committee assignments. They're not going to care about answering to Pelosi or the institutional pressures that exist in the Democratic Party. They are going to be there as proof of concept of what can be done, and they will make full use of what is progressives now. Even the progressives in the Democratic Party, their best weapon, tool, and leverage, which is the bully pulpit and their ability to galvanize the country, because they stand for the things that the majority of Americans do.
And I want to ask you, because this hasn't happened yet, but obviously the corporate Democratic Party still is gaslighting groups like the Justice Democrats. Don't challenge incumbent Democrats. You're being, obstructive, or you're threatening to divide the party, blah, blah, blah. I mean, potentially you could have then Justice Democrats and progressive groups running in the Democratic Party. I don't want to say gaslight, but suggesting you and People's Party might be hurting their candidates' chances. What would be your response to that?
Well, we're not planning on running against progressives.
Okay.
We are planning on running against corporate candidates. And so there's all these districts across the country. One of the things that Thomas Frank, we've been working with him. He's been advising us some. And one of the things that we've been discussing with him, for example, is the idea that because the two parties have so heavily gerrymandered the country, we have a system where most of the districts across the country are really one-party districts. They lean heavily to the Democrats or heavily to the Republicans. Now, what that means is that it's because the party system has essentially become brittle, because we can step in as an independent party and we can be the second party running in either of those districts, either just against the Republicans or the Democrats. And so that's the kind of thing that we're looking at, especially these kind of there's all these very heavily deep blue districts in states across the country where you have some establishment Democrat that's been there for decades. They're completely out of step with their district. They're completely out of step, with how progressive the Democratic Party in the country is. And Bernie Sanders did, say he won it twice, for example, both times. And so it's that's a district, for example, that has enormous potential for us to run a People's Party candidate. The kinds of candidates that we're looking for are people who are really well rooted in their communities. We've gotten some advice from Brand New Congress and others about what kinds of candidates are very successful. Obviously, those are the kinds of candidates that we want as our kind of first generation, people who are already known, people who have a history of service and work in their communities. And by doing that, they're already known there. They don't have to start from scratch. They kind of know, who can support their campaign. They have an existing base of people who can support them both through volunteer, build that ground game, do the door knocking, the high traffic canvassing, the phone banking, and at the same time support them financially in those districts. So those are the kinds of districts that we're looking to target and the kinds of candidates that we're looking to run there.
And lastly, let's just solve the scandal right here. There was a Slack channel of the People's Party. It said things about, honestly, I didn't read the whole thing, but I think it said, somebody said, well, this forced the vote thing will blow up the Democratic Party. People will come to us. I assume forced the vote wasn't really a dark psyops to destroy the Democratic Party and, flood everybody over to you. But I figured I'd ask you to set the record straight on that.
We have thousands of people in our Slack, and taking some random screenshots of what some random people say is probably not the most representative. That would that might be the equivalent of kind of like going into any article that you would write, and then screen capping some of the comments underneath, and then being like, "This is representative of what everybody in the organization or the party believes." And so I think that's kind of silly. And the other thing that I want to bring up is that, I mean, in the people who we work with, they're real working people across the country. They just want they just want to be taken care of, and they want a level of security. They want to know that they have health care. They want to know that if they get into an accident, they're going to be able to afford it. They want to know that they're going to be able to afford their medical bills. Myself, I can hardly afford my own health care, and I have literally like the cheapest, the worst plan at catastrophic level that you can buy in the marketplace, And so I was disappointed. I was disappointed when they didn't do it. Everybody was disappointed. I think many of us expected that they would do something. Even me, I'm pretty disillusioned about the Democratic Party, but I was still hoping that they would do something. I was still watching with everybody else who's a part of MPP, and I think, a part of the broader progressive movement. We were watching very intently and with hope that the progressives were going to pull something out at the last minute, and you saw AOC and you saw Cori Bush, withhold their votes for a time there. We thought, oh my gosh, are they going to do something? And so we were cheering for it. We were cheering because all we want is for it to happen. That's why we took it on. I think this kind of argument that, or this case that some people are trying to make that it's like we wanted it to fail is so nihilistic and disingenuous. We want to advance that fight. And I myself, in building the movement for a People's Party, and many of the people, we are an all-volunteer organization, and the idea that we've worked for 4 years, to just try to kind of sabotage the progressives in the Democratic Party, I think that's so disingenuous. It was the progressives who, despite our best efforts and our best overtures, decided not to do it. And that was very disappointing. And, I'm not saying that they're all frauds and all of that. Rather, what I look at, because I studied sociology and I look at it from that perspective, I say that they're within a system, they're within the confines of a party and a system that doesn't permit them to be progressive. And that's what we need to address.
And where can people find out more on the movement for People's Party?
At peoplesparty.org, you can find us there. You can volunteer. Right now, we're building hubs across the country. We're building state parties, and we would love to work with you on it.
Thanks, Nick. We'll keep in touch as the country continues burning. Thank you.
Great talking to you, Jordan.
Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.